Hi everyone, my name is Eric Sembrat, so I'm just gonna go, I've got a couple of slides just going over essentially why I love Sass so much. So today we're gonna be talking about theming in Drupal using Sass, and this is gonna be mainly a sort of high-level workshop for getting you guys comfortable with the basics of Sass. So for the more advanced topics like media queries, breakpoints, all that fun stuff, we'll talk about that towards the end, but I just wanna make sure I get everyone caught up with Sass and sort of what the deal is behind it. How many people in here work with CSS on a pretty regular basis? Okay, so majority. So CSS is basically a prerequisite for Sass, and that's because it follows very closely with Sass, which I'll go over in a second. But first off, a little about me. I work at Georgia Tech in the College of Engineering. I'm a web manager by day and graduate student by night, so I keep my days pretty busy. But at Georgia Tech, pretty much within the College of Engineering, we've moved basically for all new projects to Sass exclusively, simply because it makes it so much easier to theme and to share commonalities and sort of segments between each of the projects without having to copy and paste and worry about colors and have to change those. It's very easy to use it using Sass, and I'll go over why in a little bit. So of course, what you'll need tonight, a laptop or a computer, which most of you have. Your virtual Drupal installation, which I believe I suggested the Acquia Dev desktop, whichever works really, as long as you can get Drupal to show up on your machine, you're fine. The third part was probably the most difficult part, which was finding a Sass application such as Scout or Compass, or running it command line if you're feeling gutsy to do it. And then finally, I posted a starter theme using Zen with a couple extra of Sass in it to sort of give you an idea of how to use it, just at a very high level. And you can find that on the meetup group if you have not seen that so far. So, and of course, if you forgot anything and you can't get Sass to work, there's a website called Sassmeister, and it actually allows you to sort of play with Sass code and have it compile the CSS in your browser, which would be good if you're wanting to see how it works, not so much try and deploy it on a website in Drupal land. So this emotion is how CSS makes me feel. When I write it by myself, it really frustrates me simply because, one, I'm having to repeat myself over and over again, and two, heaven forbid, I have to make a change to a color, and I've made one of the hex text values uppercase and one of them lowercase. It drives me absolutely wild. Sass, on the other hand, makes me feel really, really good, and it's because really it takes a lot of the legwork and a lot of the complicated simplicity of Sass and sort of gives it that object-oriented feel that allows me to reuse code, assign variables to make things easier, and make my life a lot easier for writing Sass. And so on their website, they define Sass simply as a powerful CSS extension language. So what you need to know is that it extends off of CSS and compiles Sass code, sort of like Sass shortcuts, into the CSS you all know and love. And so what we're going to cover today is some pretty basics with Sass, the idea behind variables and data types within Sass, the concepts of mixins and chunking your Sass to reuse it, and that means like putting things together and then putting it in different places to use it over and over again. And finally, the wonders of nesting and partial files. And so if you haven't seen any other discussions on Sass, I've done a couple of other presentations, and I sort of invite you to go to my website and sort of just look at those if you really want to get a text-based look at what Sass has and what each feature of Sass is. Since this will be a workshop, there won't be any more slides. I'll pretty much be diving straight into CSS code and a Drupal website. So if you want something that's a bit more structured and something to reference later on, feel free to look at any of these, and I'll post these to the meetup afterwards if you guys want to take a look at it. So without further ado, I'll get started. And so what applications did everyone get for compiling their Sass? Compass?
Scout.
Okay, Scout. Cool. Anything else? Any other? I know one person talked about CodeKit. Did they end up going with that if they're here? Okay, then Compass it is. Now the reason why I like Compass is because it's so very simple. All it is a tooltip at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over what a Sass theme is. And to do that, what I'll do is I'll just bring up the Sass theme that I was working with a little while ago. So let me find that bad boy. Yes.
I have one question. In the instruction to download, there was a feed, and there was something called features. Where was that supposed to go?
So features is a Drupal module that allows you to basically put together certain features of Drupal, like content types, like views, all those things, and be able to export that and import that into Drupal. So what I did is I basically featureized a content type of a photo gallery, and then a view that shows the photo gallery, and then I sent that out to allow you guys, if you are running Drupal on one of your machines, to install that feature. And then when you apply the theme to it, the theme will automatically bring the Sass and CSS over to, in this case, the photo album that was created for it.
Oh, so what do? We take that code and put it inside the features directory?
No. So what you'll do is, if you've never played with features, what you'll do is you'll treat that like any other module in Drupal. So you'll go to Drupal, your local Drupal install, go to Sites, All Modules, and in the Modules directory, throw it in there, and then just log into your Drupal site, log in as an administrator, go to Modules, and see if that module's there, and click Install. And that's it. And so let me find the theme real quick, because I can't remember where I put it. I think it's over.
So is this the theme that you created? Is it a straight base theme of Zen 5?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So if how many people have played with Zen before?
Repeat the question for your.
Okay. So the question was, is this just a base theme off of Zen 5, the latest version of Zen? And the answer is yes. Pretty much what I did is I took the starter theme and basically renamed it so Zen and Drupal would not freak out at there being a starter theme there, and then just added a couple of CSS into there to sort of get us started. Okay. But what I'll do before we dive into that is go over what makes a theme Sass friendly. And really that takes two components. The first one is this file right here, which is config.ruby. And the other one, of course, is your wonderful Sass directory. So config.ruby is essentially, it's either generated by Compass or Scout when you create a project, or it's automatically added in there if, for example, in Zen's case, Zen's starter theme automatically has a config file built into there. So if you want to generate it, you're more than welcome to with your GUI of choice, but in this case, I'm just going to show you what it's made of. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So the idea behind config is that pretty much it just goes over exactly where Sass should be looking for your CSS, your Sass, and your Sass extensions. So really the most important thing for tonight will be all of these, which is the location of the theme's resources. So this shows where the Sass exists at, where the CSS goes once it's compiled, and if you have any extensions, which I'll go into later, where those go in. And then of course if you have any images or JavaScript that Sass will be using, which we will not. Everything else sort of works for whether how you're wanting to compile your CSS, and some GUIs like Compass will automatically change that, some will not. So it's not required for starting Sass development, but as you're working more and more with it, it may be something to look into. But I think for right now, it's a little bit more advanced than I'd like to get into for the first part. So now that we've looked at the config file, you've got a Sass folder which pretty much shows you all your Sass files. In this case, the Zen subtheme comes with a lot of Sass files to begin with. So what I'm going to do pretty much is find the basic theme. And then let me bring up what I've done. So in this case, Sass essentially compiles all of this into CSS, but I've added some extra files, so you can pretty much ignore everything except for the zen-adug and the adug folder, because those are the ones that are important here. So if you look in the zen-adug.scss folder, you'll see that pretty much it defines two things. At first, it just says what the background color should be, and then it goes through and starts importing certain things. So the first import, which is Compass, is pretty much adding in that Compass functionality. And for anyone who looked into what Compass is like an add-on to Sass. So you have Sass, which works very simply to do the basic features of pre-compiling CSS. Sass goes a step further and says, For CSS3, like vendor prefixes and all those annoying things that you see with all the cool stuff on the web, like animation and text shadows where you have to do 5 of them for each browser, Compass really makes that easy. And so I'll go into that a little bit later, but to use it, I have to import it first. And then, of course, to make this a little bit more readable, I'm essentially spreading out each of these Sass files into its own separate files so that we're not looking at a giant wall of text. And so I'm just going to open up all 4 of these. Can everyone read everything up here just fine? Okay. So let's just start with the first file, which is zen-adug-1-start. So essentially, one of the greatest things about Sass is the ability to sort of make shortcuts within your CSS and sort of clean up a lot of what you're doing when you're writing your CSS code. So one of the first and most important things that come into mind when you're thinking about Sass is what's something that you're constantly referring to that you hate when you have to change it somewhere within CSS? And the answer to that would be colors. Thank you. Yes, any kind of color would drive you insane. Whether it's you having to declare it, whether it's you having to change that color, or do any kind of manipulation to it. I have no idea how to manipulate hex values to change colors, to make it brighter or darker or change the hue of it. I just don't understand it. And I've tried to, believe me, but it just doesn't work for me. So that's where sort of Sass comes into play, because it allows me to take a variable and sort of make colors and then apply things to them. So to begin with, you'll notice that this looks very much like CSS, and that's the point of Sass, is to go with what you already know and add a couple extra things to it. So, for example, this padding looks very similar to CSS, with the difference that instead of saying the padding pixels or the width or the amount of padding, it's given a variable which is defined right above it. And to define a variable, simply you put a $, name the variable, put a colon, and then put the value there. And so values can be pretty much anything you've ever encountered in CSS. So things like pixels, things like, strings. You can do even null if you're feeling gutsy, although I don't know why you'd want to do that. But and there's a couple other ones, but really I think for right now, the main things that you guys normally work with are things like, pixel widths, hex colors, all those fun things. So in this case, yes.
In regards to variables, can you just kind of have another file with just all of your variables versus having them kind of embedded in the actual code?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a great question because that's actually what I do in a more advanced project that I do, and I can show that right now. What I do is I define them first and foremost, so I have a nice little repository of colors to go with. So in this case, I've got a colors file that has all these colors in here, and then that's the only thing that's in there. And then in the further files, I just reference them over and over and over and again. And so you can place them anywhere in anything. But for basically getting started, I wanted to have them right next to where they're being used. But yes, you can define them outside of anything. But for example, if I were to define variable right here, it's only available within this particular nest. So variable won't exist outside of it. So for right now, I've done one width right here, a color right here, and then another, yes?
So you use the dollar variable, so does that mean, does everything have to start with variable and then something?
No. With Sass, not everything has to. Well, if you're wanting to make a variable, yes. Anything that starts with any variable used in Sass will have to start with a $. But
Only your word variable.
Yeah, you don't have to use the word variable.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm so sorry. So I can make this bananas.
Thank you.
Because bananas are my favorite fruit, and just reference it over and over again. So in this case, I could do, short width.
Right.
Sorry, I did not realize when I was doing that. Thank you. But yeah, so you can make it anything you want. And as long as, I don't know if there's a limit. I really haven't made a giant enough variable to test it. It looks beautiful. I love that beard. Where did it come from?
Don't forget to repeat the
It came from
Oh, absolutely. So the question was, so all my variables were named variable dash something, and the question was, do they have to be? And the answer is no. That was a short-sighted move on my part. An example down here sort of shows that I just had something that's a variable called width, and so I just named it width, and then I can just refer to it there and there. So another feature that you'll notice from the just looking at this page is that these this declaration is nested within this declaration, and to show why that's so nice, I think I just need to bring up the outputted CSS to show you why it saves you so much time. Which, if I can find the outputted CSS, and so when it compiles all that wonderful Sass, what it'll do is it'll spit out this, which in this case it keeps all the comments, and then it goes through and does all the logic. So in this case, I've got view picture albums right here, which is referencing a class of a view in Drupal. And when it compiles, it's going to take everything that's above it in the nest, in this case, all this wonderful stuff, and just toss it in the front. So you'll see that it does all this annoying stuff, so you don't have to repeat yourself over and over and over again when you're declaring your CSS. And this is really nice in Drupal because if you really want to get specific with your CSS, you have probably realized that to get that specific, you have to write out quite a bit if you want to override a particular CSS attribute within a parent theme or within a module CSS. So this allows you to stack these so that it's not so hideous on your eyes, and it sort of helps you figure out where everything is going, so you're not having the declaration that goes all the way out here. And so when this compiles, another thing that I should note is that all these variable declarations do not show up. So if you take a look, there's no variable declaration right before here. It just throws that variable in there and hides any evidence of it, because Sass doesn't know what to do with a variable. So in that case, it just doesn't add it in there because it has no use. And so really, the only other thing that's important on this page is the fact that you can do division, addition, subtraction, multiplication on the variables and values that you have within Sass. So in this case, I have a width of 500. And in this case, what I can do is I can divide that 500 by 5 to give it a height. And this is especially nice if you're working with grids or theme frameworks, which you might see very soon here. Brian, when's your presentation again? Next week. You'll see a lot of things like that, where there's a lot of, if you look at the CSS backend of that, there's going to be a lot of widths that you can't imagine why someone would write out that decimal number that far. That's because computers are doing it, I wouldn't do that kind of math. And I'm awful at math, so this really helps because I am horrible at subtracting and multiplying and everything. So it really helps out. And you can do this with strings. You can do this with hex values if you're feeling that gutsy. But for simplicity's sake, the easiest example I can give is really taking a pixel width and subtracting it or dividing it. So all that arithmetic allows you to do basic things to it. And so how many of you have actually loaded up the theme onto the Drupal website? Okay, so if you guys want to start getting a little bit more comfortable with CSS, what I'd like you to do is actually start playing with the things you've seen so far in the header of your website in the Sass file. So the first thing you'll want to do is, of course, open up your Sass GUI of choice and have it watch the folder. And what watching the folder means is that what it's doing is it's going to check that folder and every Sass file in it for changes. And when changes are made to that, it's going to automatically compile those changes and spit out the brand new version of CSS as soon as you save those changes. So I can give an example of this. Oh, where did I put you?
I love your little image, by the way.
Which one?
Of the theme.
Oh, absolutely. It's beautiful, isn't it? I try to have some fun every now and then. What did I use? Oh, yeah. Oh, she's so sad. So anyways, so if you take a look here, I'll show you an example. So in this Sass file, let's say I want to make the content color of orange, because orange is beautiful. As soon as I've saved it and I refresh, unless I'm missing something, why is it not doing it?
You don't have
What's that?
Because we're at.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I get for doing something off the top of my head. Let me make sure I'm not messing anything up over on this end. Let me just clean and compile. Let me try something else.
Slow internet or something?
No, luckily, Sass doesn't really require any internet, and since I'm running everything locally, I don't have to deal with that. It's probably user error, as usual, on my end. So, yeah, pressure, of course. Always, always, always. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. So why don't you guys spend a couple minutes and get comfortable with using variables and nesting with the header of the website. So the header I'm just going to define as this general area. So everything in this beautiful area, you're welcome to theme it how you would like. Just sort of play around with colors, with, doing division, addition to colors, adding two colors together, adding widths if you're wanting to get crazy, just to sort of get you more comfortable with how variables and how nesting works. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to holler at me. I will come back at about 7:08 and continue on. Yes?
Which folder did you go to track the...
So what you'll want to...
Sass, or which one do you...
You'll want to do the root directory of your theme. So,
Okay, so root to
so in this case, the folder that has your Sass and CSS folders in it. So in this case, what I've done is I've said, watch this folder, and I've navigated to the directory that has the Sass folder and the CSS folder, and then I just say, please watch it.
Hey, can I take off the requirement of features and it'll work?
For
The admin demo?
Yeah. All that does. So the only reason why it's there is because the latter parts of the Sass workshop sort of take a view, and that view is tossed from the feature. So the feature creates the view, creates the content type, and does all that.
Okay.
So if you just want to play with the basics of it, that's fine. It's not going to mess anything up.
I think I have two
I'll just
sub themes
download
in my.
features and views.
So the ADUG Sass, that's the sub theme. And the feature.
I bet this is being overwritten somewhere.
The ADUG Sass demo. That one is
So I got this in the wrong place.
yeah, it should be in the module.
That's why it's on a completely wrong page.
Did you figure it out?
Yep, I was on the wrong page. Ta-da! Beautiful. So, yeah.
Where's the orange? Now it's pink.
So now it's orange. So if I refresh it, now it's beautiful pink.
Oh, okay, that's what you were changing.
Absolutely.
So which folder do we have to set to what?
The root directory of the theme that has Sass in it. So in this case, your sub theme. So the folder that has the config.ruby in it and has a CSS and a Sass folder.
Any idea what you do from command line?
The amount of times that I've successfully worked with command line are
Compass watch.
Compass watch.
Compass watch.
Okay, so you run compass with a watch and from what directory?
From the theme
From the
directory.
theme, yeah, from the theme directory, just compass and then
Compass.
space and then the word watch.
Not from the CSS, but from the.
Wherever your config.rb.
I'm watching the Sass folder.
That's where you want to run.
that's a very good way of putting it.
Actually, do it. The theme
Repeat that
folder
question
should
so
work.
everybody
So the
knows.
question was where, if you're running Compass on the command line, what should you type to get it to start watching a directory? And the answer was to do Compass watch, and to do that from not at all what I wanted,
From the theme directory.
from the theme directory. So here it is right here. So you would do Compass watch and then put the path to directory.
So I guess you could either stick it in the background, or if you've got screen, you could start that on one screen, and you could sit there, go to your other screen, and then.
Yeah, or open up a new tab if you have, do all that.
Compiling it, but it's not working.
Is it giving you an error, or is it just not working?
Well, it's changing the color.
Uh-huh. Okay, so so the color, how are you defining the color over here? Are you just doing like, body,
Actually, I just went to the variable. And
this one up top?
And I just went to 000.
Okay, and did you update? So this one refers to a page called pictures, so it'll only show up on that page. So watch, if I were to change this to just plain body, and now if I go to the home page, you'll get blinded by color.
Got it. See, I wasn't thinking about that.
That's okay. That's what threw me off at first as well. So the question was,
Or you could just create a new variable and put it above it.
True, but I'm looking for the simple. Yes, let's make it work.
absolutely.
For some reason. Yeah, I didn't do it. All right, let me figure this out.
And are you checking? So if you have any trouble working with Sass, one great thing to see what went wrong is to look at your CSS and make sure that it's actually putting out the CSS that you want. So really in this case, all these Zen files compile into zen-adug.css. So if you open up that file, you'll see where everything's being done and where the source of all the files are. So in this case, all this wonderful CSS is compiled from line 30 of this Sass file. So it's great when you're debugging when you can't find things.
Yeah, that's pretty slick.
Yeah, and by default, that's what Compass goes with in development mode. It sort of allows you to sort of trace where things go wrong. And if, let me see if I can get it to explode real quick. So Compass will automatically throw up some ugly errors when I make a giant mistake. And then if I were to refresh this page, you'll see immediately that Compass will also throw the error at the very top of your page, so you basically have to see it. Because in this case, I see the same error that Compass threw up, and it says, man, I do not like what you did with the Sass for this line right here. So it's saying, you know, line 34 of this file, you don't like. And sure enough, line 34, I completely forgot a colon. So if I save it, refresh, everything's back to normal. And so it's great for debugging in development mode and just in general. What's that?
And that's Compass.
No, I was just applying it to something, but not.
And that's Compass that's doing that for you.
Compass is throwing up the error here.
Okay.
I believe Sass by default, no matter what you're using, will throw up that error there. Because what it'll do is you'll copy the error into something.
What if you leave off the semicolon at the end of the line? Does it then tell you weird things like this line 850?
Yep. So I just took a semicolon off the end of this line, and it's freaking out because it has no idea what to make of all of it. So if I refresh this page now, it's saying, whoa, it's expecting, you know, some sort of value, and it instead is getting something completely different. So if we look at line 35, we'll see that it's going on to the next line, but it has no idea how to interpret this because the semicolon's missing here. So all I have to do is add that, save it, refresh, and I'm back to normal. And so Sass does that for a lot of things. One major thing that it works with, and it's something that you guys will learn as you work more with Sass, is if you forget one of these brackets, it'll yell that it's looking for the end bracket to end your particular nesting. So in this case, everything's closed out except for body content. And Sass is reaching the end of this file, and it has no idea what to do because one of them are still open. So in this case, it's going to freak out, and if I reload, it's going to show that it reached the end of the file, 59, which is the very end of it, and was expecting the end of the bracket, which is essentially saying you need to close out the rest of your brackets. Yeah, what's up?
Question, Eric, if you do, like, say you're in a CSS file, and you've got, like, right here, you've got body content. If I wanted to describe a variable for something in body content, does it have to be within body content, or can it be above it?
So it's sort of like scoping, so it's where you want to scope your variable. So if you have a variable within here.
You can globally scope them.
You can globally versus, okay.
Yeah, and of course, you know, remember with CSS that CSS and Sass by extension will only know something if it comes before it's being used. So you can't define something at the very end of your very last file that's being compiled and expect everything before it to remember it, because it's not going to. So usually what I do is when I begin a project, I create a file first that has all my variables, and then I just throw that in, make it, you know, something that has an underscore in its name, so it's, you know, looked at first, and so that Sass will touch it. It'll know all the variables and everything that I need to know, so that when I jump into my first CSS line, it already has all the information. So when I want to say, use this gold color, because I can never remember the hex, it'll know exactly what to do. And you...
What should I do? What should I create for content? Pictures or articles?
Pictures. And so it'll automatically generate some funky looking pictures, and that just sort of allows the view to do something with it. Any other questions, concerns?
Go to your make sure it ran. It's not showing that you ran anything.
Is Scout not running watch on there?
It doesn't seem like it.
I have to admit, I don't use Scout enough. The GUI sort of threw me off of it.
It didn't create the image.
Double click on this. And see.
Really?
It created the text.
So you use Devel and it... Well, that's weird. Because what it should be doing is, you know, creating...
Oh, there it is.
Oh,
Don't scroll down.
nice. That's okay. You scared me. I was like, oh gosh.
Monitoring the Sass folder inside the zip.
Click the theme folder, not the Sass.
That's what it is. So the file that has your config.ruby file, that's what you'll want to watch. Because that config file is telling it where the Sass folder is, where the CSS folder is. So that's the gatekeeper of all the knowledge. It's telling you where the CSS goes once it's compiled. It's telling you where the Sass is before it compiles.
This should be the Sass.
Yeah, inside that theme folder.
Outside of the Sass folder. So the folder right above it.
Well, no, he's doing the.
Oh, does Scout have a configuration where it wants
You
you?
can do input folder, output folder.
That's right. So yeah, it's essentially giving you a GUI to define what's in that.
So the input folder for me is Sass in the theme folder.
Wait,
So the theme is that, and then it's Sass.
Right, that's how I had it set up.
That's input, okay, and
That's what
output
makes
is
sense.
CSS.
Okay, that's how I had it set up.
But then is this, what's this? Is that the theme folder? If you're not sure, I'll just rebuild it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I've got a little play stop button here. And a play button.
Yeah, when I hit the play button, it like just decided to die. Let me just close this too.
So I'll give everyone another minute or so to play around, and then we'll move into the next topic. Just for the people who are having a little bit of trouble with Sass and their Sass GUI of choice. Because usually that's the hardest part of working with Sass, is trying to get the GUI or your command line interface to work as you intend.
I just crashed.
Your Compass did?
Yeah.
Huh. You know, I've rarely had it crash. The only time I've ever had it crash really was when I turned off caching, and it would rebuild files over and over again. With a big enough project, it will freak it out and cause it to freeze up for a good amount of time.
Oh, that's all.
Maybe I did something.
Oh, well, here's the problem. I have to put them on here. Right.
So here, this is
Why you don't let manage do the coding?
here you go. So this site's all themes, and then there would be the Zen ADUG Sass.
Oh, yeah. I know what I did. I put it into the files, mistake.
All right, so what I'll do now is move into the second file, which is operations. And so operations are the next major component of Sass that really helps you out in terms of streamlining and sort of simplifying your Sass experience. The first one was something that I brought up a little earlier, which was that you can do arithmetic stuff like addition, subtraction, multiplication, all that good stuff. So the second one will be actual functions, and these are sort of quick guides within Sass itself that allow you to do some really fun things. So Sass has a page that actually goes through what each function is built into Sass by default. So, you know, for example, there are lots of color functions that Sass has by default. So, for example, if you know the hex value or the integer value for your red, your green, your blue, you can create a color out of that. That will automatically compile into your hex value. And one of my favorite ones, of course, is mixing colors. Did you have a question? Okay, sorry. So one of the ones that I work with, before I continue, another operation that works well within Sass is your expressions like if, else, for, and each. So these allow you to add a little bit of logic into your Sass and therefore into your CSS by adding in some repetitive scripts that'll go through and do things and create Sass based on a set amount of variables that you want. So in the operations Sass file, the first part's fairly self-explanatory. I've sort of given you guys a bit more complicated example of how nesting works. So in this case, I'm looking at the view, and I'm looking at a field on the view. And then for the view, I'm just telling it to align to center. And then for the image, I'm applying a border to the image. And one important thing is this ampersand is actually a parent selector. So what that does is that parent selector basically goes all the way back here to this last value and appends this CSS to it. So if we take a look at the outputted CSS, we'll see that that ampersand is actually adding in everything before and just adding in this value right here. So that's great when you're having, you know, your CSS for on hover, on active, on visited, all that wonderful stuff when you're wanting to, for example, style links or style what happens when you hover over something in this case. So I have an image within a link tag that when I hover over it, it changes to be not as a little bit more transparent. The fun part is the for loop that is done before, or done below. What's happening with the for loop is to define a for, all you do is the @ symbol, and then you do for, you give it a variable and give it a set of values that you want it to go through. And for anyone who's ever worked with a for loop, it'll auto increment by 1, so it'll go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. In this case, it's going from 1 to 50. And for each of those numbers, I'm saying that if basically if it's divisible by 3, which is what this if value is checking, then make the row CSS this beautiful color, which is a mix of gold and white. And so if we take a look at the mix, what mix does is it takes two colors of any sort of value. So in this case, you can do hex value, you can do RGB values, and mix them together and provide a weight to the, I believe it's the first color, yeah. Yeah, so it's going to give the weight to the second one. So in this case, it gives 25, oh no, it's the weight to the second one. So in this case, I'm basically saying give 20% to gold and 80% to white and mix those two together. So in this case, when we take a look and go to the pictures directory, you'll see that each of these right here are being, each of the third rows is showing a goldish background that is being generated by the Sass to be this wonderful color that I would never pick out in all the world. So by essentially, I'm able to use the Sass that I already have and apply some color changes to it without having to sort of guesstimate what it would be. So for example, if you want to take a value that you're using in your project, like a certain hue of blue, but you want a slightly more white variation of it, you can just simply mix the, certain blue that you have and give it, 80%. And now this is going to show up as a slightly more blue, but not as intensely blue as what you were seeing before. So this works great in the case of like writing a button. If you're wanting your button to have a gradient to go from top to bottom, figuring out what that bottom color is, you really don't want to have to go to a color hex editor and try and figure out what the lighter color you want. What's easier for me, at least, is to go through here and just say mix, blue or white, or something a little bit easier. There's a Sass function, if we go to the top, which is, where are you? Lighten, which will take a color and lighten it by a certain amount. The amount.
This is your language doc script functions. Okay.
Yeah, so Sass has a bunch of documentation that explains what all it does because I can't remember half of these. So there's one that I use a lot that's lighten and darken, which essentially take a hex value or any color value and sort of adjust it by the percentage or the value that you want to give to it.
And if you're using Compass, you can just use the Compass documentation as well because it has some other things in it as well.
Yeah, and Compass has some extra stuff that Compass only has. But
the one thing I'm not quite understanding
Sure.
that you explained was the for,
okay,
the @for, and the if statements.
okay, yeah, absolutely. So it might be easier for me to sort of bring it up and look at the documentation. So Sass, if you go to their website, they have a wonderful documentation place. And if we go down here, they've got some expressions. So they've got, an if, which just simply gives you, logic. So if, 1 plus 1 equals 2, which of course it is. So because of that, it will always run that. If 5 is less than 3, it's not. So it'll never run that. So, that kind of stuff is how if loops are done. Of course, you can attach if loops to else. So in this case, you have an if that checks to see if the type is ocean, and it's not because it's monster. Because it's not, then it checks this one. It's not that either, but it checks this one. Yes, it is. So it'll run that. And if it's none of those, then it's going to run that. And so the for loop is a bit more complicated because the for loop needs a variable that it needs to increment, a starting value where it needs to start at, and an end value where it needs to end at. So in this case, in the example I have here, it's taking a variable called I, and it's increasing it from 1 to 50. So, it's going through here once it's basically evaluating all of this with I being equal to 1. And it's saying, is 1 divisible by 3? No, it's not. So it ignores that. And then it increases it to 2. Is 2 divisible by 3? And then it goes to 3. Of course it is. So then what it does is it runs all this down here and adds that CSS in. So if we take a look at the CSS, you can see that all these rows are divisible by 3. So I've got views row 3, views row 6. Yeah, and it goes all the way down to 48, which would be the last one that you would expect.
So
yes.
the only way
The
only way it knows that you're talking about the views rows is because you put the views rows class right there.
Yep. So what it'll do is, when that compiles, that for loop and if loop aren't going to show up at all. It's what's inside of that that's going to be compiled and what's going to happen.
Okay.
So.
And then you put the I variable inside the if statement.
Yep. So what that's doing is it's saying, here's the class. What's the word I'm looking for? The start of the class name, and then I'm saying, look for this variable and append it to the end of it. And then what I want it to do is to use that variable to build the class name and then to give it a background color value.
Kind of goes backwards in a way.
Oh, yeah, basically. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Is there a reason why you chose to use Sass versus less?
So one of the reason why I use Sass is actually the next part that I'll go over, and it's the one thing that's changed why I love Sass so much and why less did not appeal to me when I was first evaluating less. Now I don't know if less has mix-in-like capabilities, but what Sass allows you to do is sort of chunk together a bunch of logic in Sass and put it into something that's called a mix-in, and I can reuse that over and over and over again. Basically treat it like a function if you've ever looked at computer science. So I'm able to generate a function with a variable argument and pass that over and use it over and over and over again, which I'll go over in a couple minutes. But that's the one thing that sold me on Sass. The comparison is, Sass is a little bit harder to set up at first, but that mix-in functionality really sold it for me. And so it sort of made it a really easy decision to make. And so what I'd like you guys to do now is take a look at all the CSS on this page. And what I'd like you to do is sort of experiment a little bit with if values, with for statements. And what I'd like you to do is to take the photo album view here and sort of play around a little bit with some loops or some functions if you want to make some additional changes to colors. I've added the documentation to both expressions and functions within the comments of the Sass file if you want to look at what else Sass has available. So in this case, if you wanted not to mix colors, but instead, let's say you wanted to instead get just the green component of a color, or adjust the hue of a color by a certain amount of degrees to change the color to a completely different set of color, but still in the same realm of, the amount of darkness or lightness to it. Yes?
Do you guys work with designers in your shop?
We usually get designers for more conceptual stuff. Really, Georgia Tech works a lot with outside firms for game design, and then we convert it into Sass and to Drupal.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm interested in is, the conversion from, so designers coming in talking Photoshop.
Sure.
X values, and then you want to convert to this.
Well, so for example, Georgia Tech recently underwent a web design or web redesign, and what we got back was a bunch of CSS. And converting that into Sass, if you just throw all that CSS into your folder called Sass and rename each of those CSS files to .scss, you technically have a Sass project there. Now, that Sass isn't doing anything when it gets compiled because all of it is basic CSS. But from there, you can go in and edit each of those files to, for example, add in variables for the things that you see over and over again, chunk out, the various, functions they're using. If you see, for example, that they're slightly tuning a color every now and then, you could, sort of chunk that out. Or sort of separate it into more logical organizations so you don't open up a CSS file that has 10,000 lines and you have to go through and find the part that appeals to a ordered list or an unordered list. And so really it depends on what you get. If you get, for example, a Photoshop file, there's not a whole lot you can do with that because you still have to make the theme. But Sass will allow you to sort of take some shortcuts when you're developing that theme so that you can sort of think about it and say, well, I want to reuse this button style everywhere because that's what the design people gave us. And if you can design it once in Sass, you can chunk it into a function where whenever you want that, button to be used, you just reference that button and it'll automatically add it in there every time without you having to type in that annoying CSS every time.
So you basically could just create variables or mix-ins for each one of the styles that you're seeing in the CSS form.
Absolutely. And I can go into that in a couple of minutes once we go to the next section because that's probably the most important part of Sass in general. And it's something that once you get to sort of wrap your head around it, you'll realize how it'll save you so much time when you're wanting to maintain consistency across all sections of your website where you're wanting to put, for example, buttons in different, HTML tags or in different views. So we'll go over that in a second. So feel free to look through the documentation and start, playing around with your if loops, with your for loops, your each loops. And so I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll move into mix-ins, which will probably be the most important part here.
I thought they weren't showing you there. I just had to refresh.
Oh, maybe I should clear cache.
Did you leave the bell too?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems with it. It just threw it up there automatically.
I did generate content. It's here's content, but no imagery.
Huh.
Whatever, but the rest of the content is fine.
There you go. That's weird. Yeah, it's the first time I've ever used that, and it comes in handy.
I've never used it.
Yeah, I learned it that it was when I was preparing for this week. And
So what are they doing to the photo album? Like, what's it going to look like when they...
well, tell you the truth, they can do whatever they want. What I'm really wanting them to do is to get familiar with how to use if loops, because for someone who has never touched a programming language, something like an if loop may be a little more complicated than normal. Or to look at the function list, which gives you an idea of how to pass in arguments to a function that Sass uses. So this sort of gets you comfortable with how functions work and then how if loops work, which is essentially an extension of nesting. So both of those sort of extend the nesting that we're already doing and the variables that we already have done, and sort of expand on that a little bit more to add in a little extra complexity into there. And of course, all that's going to be built upon it even more for mix-ins. Yeah, and it's really great for things like views, where views will incrementally count each of the rows. If you're using grids, it'll do all that, and it makes it a lot easier for you to not have to basically write down a bunch of CSS that you know is really tedious, that you shouldn't have to do.
Now, you just used the I just because you felt like you...
Yeah, I could name that variable, donuts. Oh, I see. That's right. And the only reason why I used I was out of basically when you Computer Science 101 basically drills it into your head that when you're doing a for loop, the variable should be named I. So it's just a matter of habit, really.
You're gonna have an error.
But you can name it whatever you.
Variables got the wrong name.
What's that?
Second
Donuts with an S.
Oh, nicely done. So that one won't even compile because they will have no idea what to do with that.
Take the S out of donuts.
Oh, look at that. And look, now it's freaking out. It's saying, what am I doing? And I forgot this one too. That's what I get for good eye.
What's donut mean?
Donut.
Variable made up.
It's a
He's replacing I for the incrementer with
donut, something beautiful.
What would be another example of a good if statement? Like, because I mean, you're using divisible.
Mm-hmm.
Division. Like, what would be another one?
So, yeah, if you want to do like row, so if I wanted to do
like every fourth row.
every fourth row, if you wanted to, so there's a list function in Sass. Let me see if I can do this right. Yeah, so I'm gonna do rainbow. I'm gonna do even, odd.
Repeat the question.
So the question is, what else could I use if and for loops for? So I'm gonna try to do this off the bat, and I'll see if it breaks, because I imagine it may. Given my, I'm just gonna go back to I, because it feels so right. So for this, what I would do is, no, that wouldn't work. I'm trying to think of a good case for where you might be able to do it. Really, I like to use it for sort of programmatically writing my own CSS for rows and stuff and views. That's really the biggest thing where I've used it.
Yeah.
So like, let's say you have a term, a taxonomy term that you want as a tag.
Right.
And when you put that tag in a view, you're adding some CSS to that field in a view to have the taxonomy ID.
Okay.
And so with the if loop, then what I can do is say if that I equals the TID, which would be the taxonomy ID of that specific one, then change the color to that. Or if it's between there and there, make all those that color. If it's between there and there, make it all that color. Those types of things.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I use that a lot with tagging just because it helps me chunk things together. And plus what I can do then is dynamically build all those tagging colors. So each of those tags is a separate color. And it's something that's defined based on what that I value is. So in this case, you know, if I had I through 2000,
Right.
and then what I was doing was if, you know, just get rid of this if because I don't need it anymore. What I would do is, you know, make this, so this would be like a TID dash the color. And then what I would do is go to, what's that number? There's, which one is it? There's one that adjusts the color. There it is. So adjust hue, pink by I. So that's adjusting pink. Because I thought it was. What am I doing wrong? There it is.
This would be dynamite for views responsive grid. Be able to do a grid and be able to change the coloration depending on how well the device is.
Yes, and that's a great thing for it too. And you,
Why do you change the color?
Yeah.
Well, the grid allows us to take, let's say, a 3 grid wide view.
Okay, so now when you do term ID, right?
yeah,
So you're telling it for
You should have your
I,
problem.
1 through 2,000 terms.
yep.
And then you have term ID, and then you have the I,
16
right?
items on the front
And then adjust the,
grid format.
So
adjust the color, right?
yep, and what adjust hue does is it essentially, I don't know why it's,
And you lose a row, it doesn't matter.
is it because? So what adjust hue does is it takes a color and it takes it by a certain degree and returns a color. Basically, it spins the color wheel by a certain amount. Is that gonna work? I doubt it. No, it's not. Oh well. Yeah, and you know the hardest part is really finding use cases where you'll use that.
Do everything how I did.
Really,
I love the rows. I mean,
and really views is the biggest thing I found, because when views procedurally generate something, it's going to have a lot of metadata on each of those rows that it generates and all those values. And in the case of having to style each of those for an NID or a taxonomy ID, it's great to have some shorthand there to just say, for that one, toss it in there without having to sort of type that everywhere. Yes.
Did you find any documentation besides their website about those use cases? Because it seems like there'll be probably a bunch of use cases you could use. Just
Sure. And there's so the question is, thank you so much. I'm gonna forget that every single time. The question is, what other sources of documentation exist for looking at examples of Sass or ways of working with Sass? The short answer is there's a lot of websites that have sort of training. So I've tried to sort of compile a short list on Georgia Tech's Sass website, which is a website built by me and for me. Essentially, what I've done is I've gone through here and shown, for example, a website that goes over guides on how to do everything in Sass, and then a couple of, getting started, introductory stuff, and then more advanced stuff, which Sass Bites, for example, is a podcast that goes over more advanced topics, usually within Sass and Sass projects that you see. And so because the Sass community is a little small at the moment, really a lot of people tend to go towards the main documentation for it. Sorry. sass.gatech.edu. And if you go up to the top, just click resources. Anyone have any more questions on? Yes.
I noticed that in the files you're dealing with, file name begins with an underscore. Is that a convention for encoding files or something? Or recommend you go to it for a bit?
I will go over that in a second. Okay, so essentially, if we go back to zen-adug.scss, you'll notice that I'm referencing all these files here. And as you can tell, I'm not doing underscores here. So any Sass file that has an underscore in its file name is called a partial, and partials are not turned into .css files on compilation. So for example, if I were to go ahead and comment this out, all that CSS for that file will go nowhere once I compile. So that CSS will never be generated, and if we open up so all the fun stuff that I did right here no longer appears. Yes, exactly. And partials allow you to sort of separate all your CSS. So in this case, all the Sass in these 4 files is being compiled into one CSS file, zen-adug on compilation. And so, as an example of how I would use exactly. So, why you would want to do that? A great example of this would be one of these. So if you're working with, a page that has a ton of different partial files. So for example, I've taken a theme that we're working on that was done in basic CSS and split it up into all these partial files so that I know where to go when I want to look at something. So if I want to look for how that flex slider is being styled, everything's in a partial file called flex slider. All that's being compiled into global.scss and to global.css when I compile. But I don't want to go through 10,000 lines of code to find out where flex slider is being done. So partials allow you to sort of clean it up and basically, and basically separate it how you want and give some organization how you want. So in this case, I've created a partials folder and then created a bunch of different folders based on the use cases that I want. So I've got one for pages, one for general design constraints, one for how media queries are being done, although that's because the media queries aren't converted into Sass yet, and then one for administrative garbage, and then one for finally wonderful bootstrap stuff that our consulting company added in when they gave us our theme.
Yeah, when someone first showed me Sass, a friend of mine from Walmart told me that they create so many different folders so that they're not stepping on each other's toes.
Yep.
So when you're working with a team of people, they have a ton of different partials, and you're working on the menu partial. Don't touch my partial.
And that's great if you're working collaboratively and your collaboration software doesn't have a merge command for multiple commits that are basically taking a header commit and making various changes to it. And so it's great to be able to say, you know, you have this folder within the Sass partial folder. Go to town on it. And really, it's also great because you're able to essentially reuse these wherever you want. So I can copy and paste this from one project to another, and as long as I reference it within one of the .scss folder or files that don't have a dash in front of it, I can just import that in and move with it. So for example, as I'll go over in a minute, all of my wonderful, all of my mixins are partial files. So I can drag those mixins from project to project so I don't have to redefine them and reinstantiate them. So I can just say, here's all my mixins that I want to work with. I want them separated so I can, you know, revision them and make sure, you know, what version they are and make sure what updates are being done. Cool. So does anyone else have any questions? I'm going to go into probably the biggest part here, so I want to spend as much time on this section as possible. Okay. So the biggest thing I think really about Sass and what differentiates it from Less, unless Less has added this in recently, is the power of mixins and extending. So mixins is the one that I'm most familiar with and work mostly with. Mixins essentially allow you to group up, chunk up a certain amount of CSS into a function, which is essentially a giant group of CSS that you can then call from anywhere within your document. So the best way to sort of show this off is to go ahead and just give you all of it on screen and let you digest it a little bit. So let me just make sure all this looks beautiful. Okay, so the first thing I have here is a mixin called message. And message takes in an argument that's called color. It's a variable. And its default value is red. So if no one gives a value for that argument, it's going to automatically change to red. And for this mixin, I want it to do a bunch of different stuff. So I want it to change the background color, add some color to the text, add some margin, some font stuff, and all that good stuff. And then what I've also done is created another mixin that's angry message. And what angry message does is it adds a string to it, which it's then having an argument called string, which is just a string that it has there. And what I want it to do after it adds the string to that CSS is to add everything from message. So I want it to then go up here to mixin and grab everything else. So now that I have these two mixins, which are essentially chunks of Sass, what I do down here is, well, that one's not very fun, is go down here and define it. And all I have to do to reference a mixin is do @include and then type in the mixin name, provided that the mixin exists before you type this message. So in this case, the mixin's defined up here so that when I reference it down here, it looks for the mixin called message, and I've given it a color of red, so it goes through and does all this, and it throws all this CSS right there.
You didn't have to put red.
If I were to just get rid of red and save it, it would automatically grab the default value.
But if you wanted to override it, you could.
Yep. Yeah. And so what that does is, you know, a sanity check where let's say by default I want it to use a default color of gold. And so, you know, rather than having to retype gold, gold, gold every time I'm using it, have it there. But on the off chance that I wanted to change it, let's say I wanted to add blue or pink or purple, then I have the ability to do that and sort of override it there if needed. And so what I've also done is created a more complicated mixin here. So this mixin has an all width, which basically takes a width as an argument in terms of pixels, in this case for the default value. And then what it does is it assigns the width, the minimum width, and the maximum width to that width value. And then what it also does is it has a little bit of sanity checking in it. So what I've done is it's going to check that width and see if it's over 1,000 pixels or if it's under 1 pixel. And if it's under 1 pixel, then it's going to throw a message that says far too many pixels. And if it has way too many pixels, it's going to say way too many pixels. And so how I show this is I have 250 right now. And what that's doing is essentially making this right here 250 pixels. So if I were to change this to, let's say I added a couple extra zeros than I intended to and made this a really large width. If I refresh, it's going to say way too many pixels. and it's going to reset it to, I don't think I ever had it resetting, huh? So what I can do here then is go width equals 100 pixels, min width equals 100 pixels, max width equals 100 pixels. So that when I refresh this, there you go. So you can add your logic and everything that you've done before within these mixins and sort of add in a little bit of conditional logic so that you're able to use this mixin in more situations than you would like. So in this case, a couple of examples that I've done is, for example, had a true or false for adding a gradient to a button. So I have this, mixin that creates a button for a link text, and if I want that button to have a gradient on it, all I have to do is click, enable yes, and what it'll do is it'll add a hue, a gradient to that background image based on if it's darker or if it's lighter. If it's too light, then it adds a darker one. If it's darker, then it adds a lighter hue, and it just adds that in there automatically.
So I mean, I didn't even realize that you could print text.
Yeah, and you'll notice this a lot. And the reason why I learned about that is through Font Awesome. So Font Awesome is a sort of like CSS package that allows you to use sprites fairly easily without having to rack your head every time you do it. And it's compatible with, yes, and it's compatible with Sass. So I've got it right here. Wonderful.
Before and after is just a standard CSS thing, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that's what they leverage for when they're doing these. So, Font Awesome has all these awesome little fonts, and rather than remembering, -F0003 for the search icon, I can just use this variable and it brings it over. And then, of course, all Font Awesome does is just use a bunch of CSS magic to say, before that text, add that icon there and add some padding so it looks like it's there. So, I know this is a little off track, but so having that icon to the left of it, all we're seeing on the back end is that before this, it's just adding the content there. And that content right there is the font that's using the icon. So that's just what the icon is. Yeah, so in this case, I wanted to use it to show the error so that you could see some way of why it was reaching that particular value. So mixins are great for a lot of things. I use it to chunk up all the styling standards that I'm doing. So if, for example, I've got, a particular set of styling for a paragraph of text for a subheading, then I just turn that into a mixin, and whenever it's being called in a view or in a panel, just throw that in there to automatically apply that immediately. So all I have to do is do, @include subheader text, boom, done. And it takes all that wonderful CSS and all the other stuff and attach it to there. And as you might have seen up here, you can also string mixins together. So I've got a mixin for just a message, but I've also got an angry message that adds in some text as well. So you're able to string them together so you have something that works fairly simply, and then you have something that adds in a little extra if you want to reuse all of this but add a little extra onto there, and yet still have it be reusable.
With mixins, do they have to be in certain order as well?
So because none of these are being utilized, no, because all it's doing is saying, oh, there's a mixin, oh, there's a mixin, and until it's being used, it's not referencing it.
So you don't have to.
So in this case,
you don't have to put it on the top of the box.
right. So in this case, I can put angry message right there, and if I refresh, nothing changes.
Okay.
So mixing's going to pick everything that's mixing.
Yep, and it's just getting a directory or sort of listing of all the mixins that you have available. And
So like a function in any
exactly.
programming language.
And it's tough because how do you explain a function to someone who's never touched a programming language in their life? Variables are hard enough. I remember as a kid when I first looked at a variable, I was like, what the heck is this? But, thinking about a function to someone who's never touched computer programming, it may be a little difficult to digest, but for example, think about a use case where you are constantly rewriting the same set of CSS over and over and over again with the same styling and the same conventions with maybe a little variation here and there. For example, maybe a width of something. And you really, really, really hate doing that because if you make one mistake on one of those, it's going to throw that one off and it might be a chore to find where that error is. So with Sass, what you're able to do is chunk that up and give it a little bit of logic so that you'll never make that mistake. Because all you have to do is pass in an argument or no argument at all, and it'll automatically throw in the same stuff over and over again every time. And so what can mixins be used for? Really, I say buttons over and over again because I hate styling buttons because there's so much CSS when I'm working with buttons. So in this case, you know, all of this relates to the button itself. This logic allows me to have a text shadow for the text that's either lighter or darker depending on how what the background image or the background color of the button is. And then, of course, I want some hover text so that when people see the button and they hover over it, it does something. And I don't want to have to retype this every time I have a view that has a field that has a button. Because likely on my Drupal website, there's going to be a number of cases where I'm going to have different fields acting as a button. And I really, really, really don't want to have to copy and paste this over and over again. Because if I have to change any of this, I'm going to have to go to each place where I'm changing it and say, well, instead of font size equals 12, I actually want it to be, 20. And so I don't want to do that over and over again. So that's really where it comes in handy, and I have to admit, will save your bacon if you've ever played with a theme to reduce the amount of legwork and the amount of frustration you'll have with editing your CSS once you've written it. So as a mixin, what I'd like you guys to do is just sort of start getting your feet wet with the mixin. I'm not sure that this challenge, quote unquote, works well here, but what I'd like you all to do is to at least try making your own mixin and applying it to the view. So you can make a mixin for anything. Like let's say you wanted to make a mixin for what color these boxes should be. So make a mixin that has, a background color and a border radius so that it, shows up all ovally and beautiful. And then, add some logic in so that maybe you have a default value of a background color or a border color or a shadow color and sort of apply that. That's okay. I'll see you next week.
Yeah, I'll be here next week.
Cool. I'm excited.
It's gonna be here again?
I don't think it is. I think it's gonna be the normal place.
Okay.
Digging the beard, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It makes me miss mine. Makes me miss mine so bad.
I'll go over actually send me to Buckhead.
What's that?
Send me to Buckhead? That's why it took me forever to get
Oh,
here.
jeez.
It took like an hour, over an hour.
Oh God, I'm in traffic. I'm sorry. I'm glad you found it. Yeah, great to see you. I'll see you next week, all right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Take care. So does anyone have any questions about mixins? Any confusion? Any frustration? Any?
Just absorption.
Just absorption. That's and usually, with a lot of things with Sass, really the best way to figure it out is really to just start building it. And when Compass or Scout throws an error, figuring out why you made that mistake. When I first started doing Sass, these brackets were the end of me. Especially when you're converting a theme over, because as you're converting the theme, you're going to be removing brackets for the old CSS and then tabbing to indent your new Sass and then saving it. If you forget a bracket, it's going to freak out and it's going to take a little bit of looking around to find out where that bracket's being missed at. Yes?
Do you have a good, I'm maybe gonna cover this later, like a good method for converting CSS project to Sass?
Sure. So really, there's no automated way of doing it. Really the first step would be taking all that CSS, throwing it into the Sass folder, and then renaming all of them to .scss. And then the next step, what I would do, and what I'm doing right now actually, is go through each of the .css files that are now .scss files and looking for the commonalities between each of your calls within CSS. So for example, yeah, basically refactoring or going through it all and sort of trying to apply nesting to it. And that's usually where I start. So what I'll do, I wish I had, let me see if I can find an old,
Through and look for all the colors of the thing throughout the whole system, and then create a variable for that color.
let me,
Go through and look for all your widths that are the same size, and create a variable for that width.
I've actually got a good example of this because I've been doing this for the last 3 days or so. And so I've got these 4 CSS files are all that we were given from a consulting firm. And if you take a look at them, this one's small, wonderful. This one is not. And same with the underscore CRE. This is a lot. So where I would begin here is going through it and saying, well, these are all basic CSS. I don't really want to touch that. But looking, for example, down here at all these action items. If you take a look, all these action items have a lot of things in common. So, you know, for example, we've got, actually, you know what? This one would be better. Social media links. So you've got social media links, and then, you know, what I would do is do something like that, where I split it up into social media links and then have A, which is the default one. And then right below it, now I've got one for a class called Facebook. So I would just grab this, go there. And so now I've got Sass that basically has nesting to where the social media link has a default one, and then for Facebook it's doing its own thing. And so that's usually the first step I do, is go through that, refactor it all so it's nested and grouped accordingly. And then what I usually do is start looking for commonalities like variables, colors, things that can be reused. And then I basically split it out into either variables or mix-ins, depending on the complexity of each of them. Yes?
Okay, so when this compiles, right, then you're going to have a separate selector for each one for your A, for your Facebook.
Yep, so each of these selectors is going to compile just to look exactly like this. So it's just going to say social media links dot, or social media links dot Facebook, or social media links A. It's going to look exactly the same as before. So I wish I had a good example of in this, because I haven't gotten that far. To tell you the truth, the nesting took me a couple hours to do, and by then I was like, I need a break from this theme. So I haven't got that far to figure out where I've chunked things out yet, but that's the fun part, because then as you're editing the CSS, you start to see areas where you can chunk them out into either variables or into mix-ins if you want to add in an extra layer of complexity. So in this case, as an example of the social media links, each of them have a specific width, a specific padding, a background position. You know, let's say I wanted to future-proof this and add in a little mix-in that takes in maybe some variables for this and maybe calculates this automatically. I could build that in so I'm not having to redo it over and over and over again if a new social media service comes out and we start using it. I love it. Having that there might make me a little easier. Instead of having to write all this, all I have to do is, you know, include social media and then pass in a couple of variables and call it a day. But that's something that you wouldn't be able to know until you went through all the CSS and figured out where those shortcuts could be made and if it's worth it to do it. Because in this case, you know, if I'm never going to add another social media there, is it worth it to sort of future-proof it? Unless you see yourself changing all of it, and you want to have that flexibility there. And so really what I've done is, for mix-ins especially, once I find myself repeating things as I'm going through a project, like, for example, the all-width thing, whenever I need to go through and make something a min-width, a max-width, and a width at the same time, if I'm doing this 5 times in one document, I really would like to make this into a mix-in so I can just reference it instead of having to rewrite that all the time. Because after the 3rd time or so, it's going to start to get annoying to type all 3 of those lines and then go, well, maybe it's 250 this time and 210 the last time. And then, you know, why not save myself an extra 5 minutes and have that there to where I'm more inclined to use it if it's just one line of code that I'm writing that's, you know, basically right here, just one line instead of the 3 that I have to write. And heaven forbid I add any logic in there. If I want to put some sanity checking in there so I don't make any mistakes, you know, I can add that in there too to save me if I end up, you know, adding an extra 0 or 2 or 3 instead of, you know, making it 250, making it 2500. So I tend to do that sometimes. I don't realize it until I refresh the page, and for some reason there's a ton of white space and I have no idea why. But that's my suggestion. That's a very long answer, but really going through and converting CSS to Sass is a fairly manual process simply because there's so much logic in there. Sass isn't able to go through and say, well, you'll want to mix in for this because we see it over and over again. Yes, over here first.
Are there themes that are currently being used with Drupal 7 where it's already set up for Sass so that it's easy to modify with already all the variables in?
So I believe, let me see if Zen, the base theme, has some variables in it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm hoping they do. So Zen does not, but Zen's sub-themes come with it.
Radix does. Radix, R-A-D-I-X. Radix. It does, but it's, I think you have to use Panoply maybe. I've been using that a lot.
Is it the expectation that with Drupal 8, the themes that are coming on that version will be more Sass friendly?
I don't know. I can't remember if they decided to go with a preprocessor for CSS. I know they're switching the theming. So the question was, is there any expectation of Drupal 8 having any better compatibility with Sass? And I can't remember. I want to say no. Off the top of my head, I don't think it's there by default. Yeah, so I don't think they ever went with that. I think they instead, updated the theming framework. So instead of doing PHP, they moved to, I can't remember off the top of my head. Twig, that's it. Thank you. Yeah. So really, it's up to the themer's suggestion. I'm trying to remember if Omega is. I haven't used Omega in a while because it is. Okay. Because it is so heavy, but
pretty much all the themers who create themes are using Sass or less.
And I think if you want to learn more about how they use Sass for major themes, when Brian presents next week, he'll be going over how Sass is utilized in a very low-level way. So he'll go through how the grid framework's utilizing Sass to make it easier to define those grids and make sure that your widths are kept standard so that all that logic and math is being applied at compilation and not by hand. And so that one would probably be the best way of answering your question, simply because, I can't remember what themes are using out of the box. I know Font Awesome does, and that's really the only exposure I've had with it. And like I was showing, Font Awesome allows me to, get those custom string values for a particular custom font. So I don't have to remember, a particular hex value to, use a flag or use a pencil marker. Instead, I can just use a variable name that is a lot more friendly and remember it across, the entire project.
Because I guess what I'm trying to understand is if you already have a theme that's all set up and that's not set up for Sass,
sure.
How do you convince someone to say, okay, well, we should spend the money or the work into turning your theme into something that's going to work?
I guess it depends on the time you're going to use that theme and what changes are going to be made to it. If that theme's never going to get touched, there's not a whole lot of value of adding Sass in if you're never going to make changes. But if you're going to re-architect that theme and, for example, maybe apply a mobile version to it, that's a great argument for adding Sass in. And I'll go over that in a sec now that we're towards the end of our major discussion, because there's something in Sass called, it's a extension of Sass, or sorry, is it a mix or an extension? I can't remember. It's called Breakpoint, and what it allows you to do is define media queries in line. So instead of creating your own section for mix-ins or having to go to the root and add at media and add your media query, all you would do here is define your media query by for example these pixel values or this right here, and then all you do is for the value that you want to add a media query for mobile or for a giant screen, all you do is include the breakpoint, give it the variable which would be your argument for your media query, and then just add the CSS below it.
That's awesome.
And it's a game changer for doing media queries. So instead of having to, add your own media query. So in the example of the Georgia Tech one, they've got media queries. Let me see if I can find a quick example. They've got media queries like this right here. Where is that little guy? So they've got these two right here just hiding right under them. And if I could have these two right here, where I include breakpoint for a specific variable, and then just apply that width right there, that makes a lot more sense to me, because I know that that has a default width, and then for that breakpoint or for that media query, it's changing it to that, and that makes a lot more sense to me because it's all chunked together. And it really is a game changer because it allows you to sort of group everything together and keep your media queries straight, because now all your media queries are with the default value. And when it compiles, it just compiles back to the way it was, where it has the media queries nested and does all that. Yes?
I would think if you took a theme, like we took a responsive parking, and we've taken it, we've added some extra areas into it. If we just renamed it responsive parking.ADI, -ADI. So what we're doing is we're bringing it down. We're using it for a lot of our different clients because it really does add a lot of functionality, gives them some control over the colors on the front, it sort of gives us a little bit of way to pull back and say, you can control this part. My idea now is to go in and make that Sass, and turn that into Sass. So next time I put it out, it'll be less work for me.
Okay, so the reusability.
Yeah.
And that's a great case if you're doing like work with clients, or if you have a starter theme that you want to apply, and you want to add in some short codes so that when you create a child theme, that it's very easy to reuse that styling that you've already done, but tweak it in different ways, rather than having to take that theme and apply a child theme and go through and add all this nitty gritty CSS to make sure you're overriding it correctly. And it's really, in this case, I didn't know if IBM was working with something, that was more client by client basis, or if this was all internal.
No, I mean, it's just with project cost is always the issue. So
Absolutely.
whenever you try to sell something, the idea is, okay, well, I already have this. And it's always kind of the legacy problem of if I already have this and it's kind of working, then it's usually like a pushback on as to why I should invest in changing. But the point about reusability.
And that's really it. Reusability both for, media queries and for, applying it to different use cases, and then just making changes to it. Like he was saying, if you want to change the color of your link text and you've got it defined 20 different ways in 1,000 different places on that theme, it'd be a lot easier if you had one variable you had to change rather than doing Control F for a bunch of different variations of a hex value, because there's going to be variations on that hex value.
Plus, the old adage was if it's not broke, don't fix it. The new adage is if it works, it's probably obsolete.
Did you use a lot of break-ins on the breakpoints?
So Georgia Tech, as of right now, not as of yet, not in the amount of detail that I would like to. What I'm doing right now is refactoring the theme that we got from our consulting firm and basically grouping all this wonderful media queries together so I can figure out, one, what they do, and two, where they go, so I can then go into those partial files, add a breakpoint there, make sure it's correctly defined, boom, it's done.
Yeah.
And really it's just finding the time to go through and sit through all of that, because refactoring the CSS has proven to take a little bit more time, because there's development going on that side right now. I'm having to, juggle a bunch of different changes to CSS at the same time. So it's basically the last thing on my list, and I'm very excited to do it because I know that's not going to be the end of requests for media queries for mobile views, because if someone changes the slideshow, I know that slideshow is not going to scale down to mobile very well. I know I'm going to need that media query to do magic stuff on it.
Yes.
And so the sooner I get it, the better. And so I'm really excited to dive into that. Yeah, and I think media query is the best example of where it can really save your bacon. And so Breakpoint is a good example of like a mix-in library, which is essentially Breakpoint. What they've done is they've developed a bunch of mix-ins and a bunch of logic that they've then sort of output as a simple plugin that you add into your Sass project. And if you go to your .info file, which I will find in a second, or your config.rb file, if you look, there's a Sass extensions folder, and that's where you would include your extensions on a project by project basis. And if you wanted to add it globally, for example, Compass has an extensions folder where, as you can tell, I have lots of versions of Compass. I have Breakpoint. I have something called Sass globbing. And Sass globbing is something that I've grown to love, and I know it's a goofy name, but what it does is actually quite beautiful. What it does is it goes into a directory and grabs every partial file from there. So rather than having to write this global.scss to show all my partial files here, with Sass globbing, all I have to do is put an asterisk. And what it does is it goes into this partials directory, grabs all the SCSS partials in there, and then it goes into each of the other directories and grabs each and every one and adds it to the project.
So basically it's building its own header.
Yeah, exactly. And the difficulty, of course, is, with CSS, it's all done, the one at the very bottom is going to have precedence over the one up top. Sure. So in this case, I've had to be a little careful and adjust some CSS as needed, because these partials, admin's being done first, then bootstrap, then design, then media, and then pages. So let's say pages is overriding something that design did correctly, then I'm going to have a few bugs there. But overall, this allows me to expand and add more add more partial files without having to worry about defining them right here.
having to go back and forth.
Yeah, having to go back and forth and say, oh, I added another partial and I forgot to add it here, so that Sass has no idea that partial exists. And so Sass globbing allows me to just say in 2 lines, grab everything. I just want everything there. Let me worry about when it's being used and that it's being applied correctly.
What I just noticed is that the mixins have to be above your CSS.
Sure.
Just like a variable.
Just like a variable. So Kaleem just brought up something that you can't have a mixin below where it's being used, and that sort of falls in line with sort of like a variable. So if we have a variable that's defined, for example, at the very bottom of a function or of a CSS attribute, you know, it's never going to be called because it has no idea where it is because it hasn't processed it yet. Whereas up here, it already knows what all of this is, so that when it goes down here and calls it, it knows exactly where to grab it from. So in this case, whenever I use a bunch of partials in my global file, the first thing I do is grab all my imports and all my mixins first, because none of these are being used in any of these files. So in my CSS, the first thing I do is grab all my mixins, all my color variables, all my config, which is my media query settings, and then from there, then I grab all my partials so that if my partials are referencing a mixin, a media query, or a color, it knows exactly where to go because it's already grabbed all of that in. So if we were to sort of chunk this all up into one .scss file, the mixins would show up first, then my color declarations, and then my media queries, and then all my Sass would start. And so that's the one thing that's going to really be a little annoying when you're playing with Sass to begin with, is just to make sure to watch how you're ordering when you're grabbing in variables, mixins, all your reusable content, simply because you can't reuse it if it hasn't been defined yet in Sass's eyes. Which in this case, it does it by when it's defined here, and in partials, it does it alphabetically. So when it goes through each of these, it starts at the very, very top and goes through __ global and goes all the way to _ views lightbox. So it's going to go through each of those. And if I have a mixin defined down here in the lightbox file, global's never going to see it. It has no idea it exists. And it will freak out if I try and define it over there. So does anyone have any other questions about mixins or anything like that? That's really, yes.
I ran into some issues with Chrome just looking at some CSS.
Okay.
The F12 Firebug.
Sure.
Limited one. It was saying that it couldn't get to those files. This is not using Sass. This is before using Sass. It couldn't get the files so they're protected. I'll over to Firefox and it sees them all.
Interesting.
Right now, we just ran into something here as an additional add-on for Firefox. You have to add Fire Sass into the.
That lets you see the original Sass.
Let you see the original Sass files.
Line numbers.
The line numbers, yeah. So you know back where all this stuff comes from.
And so, yeah, and if you leave it debugged, it'll show you the comments of where it's from, but I think Fire Sass goes a step further. But really, you know.
Yeah. Normally, Firebug will give you the line numbers of the CSS file.
Right. And then, so what you would have to do with.
Gives you the line numbers of the actual Sass file.
And so, like, for example, oh, geez, this one isn't going to show it because I doubt they're running. Hold on. Let me see if I can find a good example of this. So in this case, this background color. So what you're saying is like, you know, this one right here. So the only way I'd be able to see what line it is by clicking the CSS and going to it specifically and seeing there it is. So what you're saying is there's a shortcut where without having to view the CSS itself to see the comment there. And that's great because I've only used the comments there for development purposes. So that's cool. It's an extra step of usability if you really need it. Yeah.
Sometimes I couldn't get it to work.
You download Fire Sass the way you do Fire.
So it sounds like Fire Sass is a plugin to Firebug. So for for Firefox, you would just download it like you would any other extension.
Right. It's not in the standard add-ons. We actually had to do a general search for it.
Yeah, search for Fire Sass.
Google search for Fire Sass.
In Chrome.
That's not it.
Oh, that's it. It just.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a Chrome.
Search for it in the Mozilla add-on page. It's not there.
I don't know if there's a.
We don't have one for Chrome. Actually, you know what? I think the new Chrome Canary has like an experimental.
That's what I was thinking. It may be an experimental thing, but tell you the truth, I've never looked at it because I've just used comments really.
I do too.
Because usually I go straight to the Sass source when I'm trying to figure out why something isn't showing up or why it's broken. Because usually it's me miswriting the class name more so than wondering where it's being grabbed from. Because that tends to be where I run into issues most. But that's more user error than anything, which seems to always be the case. So to finish things up, I'm gonna, unless anyone has any other questions, anything? Okay, I'm gonna go into what Compass provides you, and I've sort of touched on it a little bit. But if you go to Compass's website and then go to reference, which is compass-style.org, Compass is good basically for 3 beautiful things, and I think the biggest one really is CSS3. So if you've ever used anything in CSS3, you know that, let me see if I can find a good example of it, that when you compile your CSS3, that it has a lot of these values based on the specific vendor that you're working with. So for example, box shadows, there are 3 different declarations of doing the exact same thing. And it's frustrating because all you want to do is write box shadow and call it a day. But if someone's running Mozilla or WebKit, they may not be having, they may not see the same thing that you want them to see. And so in this case, this allows you to sort of chunk all these together into a simple mix-in, which Compass provides you, where all you have to do is do @include and then just give it the Compass name that they've given for it. So a good example of this, let me see if I can find it, is linear gradients for background colors. And the reason why is because, this linear gradient is one line and it has a lot of attributes, yes, but what it does is it, gives you these background colors that in CSS are a bit more heinous because each of these take different bits for each of the browsers. So in this case, WebKit for this one does something different than the default one. So if you look, the ordering on each of these is different. And what I don't want to do is have to remember the order of each of them depending on what browser you're in. And so this is where Compass really comes into play. So if you want to do, for example, a box shadow or a text shadow, inline blocks, make something more transparent, less transparent, add a text shadow, do border radiuses. That seems to be all the rage now. That makes it really easy to add that in, so you can essentially make sure that you're covering all your bases, so that even Microsoft can get in on the game.
So this is basically just a library of calls.
That's exactly what it is. A library of mix-ins that works on one specific thing. In this case, CSS3 is a major part to what they do. And so it's really the one thing that I've used it for because I found it so easy to...
You don't even see that code. You just need to know the documentation for it.
Yep, because, when you import it, it's not going to grab anything in there from the beginning. So when I go to my initial file and say import Compass, that does nothing to the output file. Right. All it does is say, now you have that giant Compass library here so that when you want to add in anything to Compass, all you have to do now is reference it. And as long as you have that extension in your Sass folder or in your Sass GUI of choice, it'll work perfect with it. So if I wanted to add a border radius of something, for example, so if I wanted to go to each image and include border radius 100%, and there you go. And so now I don't have to worry about what browser is going to be compatible with it, because in CSS3's eye, everything's compatible with it because they've gone through every edge case in terms of what browser has which specific CSS3 declaration and how they handle it on the back end. And it's just defining all of it. And then it's up to the browser to see which ones it works with. Sure. So for example, with this one, all that Chrome cares about is border radius and then the WebKit declaration of it. And beyond that, that's it.
So Compass is handling that for us.
Yeah. And so Compass is just a mix-in library that allows me to say include border radius, and that's just declaring a mix-in that they've already developed. And then all I do is pass in the argument that they want, and it adds all that in there.
Built-in library.
Yeah. And it's great for this kind of stuff because, your clients or your people who are paying you are going to want some of these things. And what you don't want to do is deliver something where if they're using IE 8 or something disgusting like that, they go on there and they can't see it, and they're saying, why didn't you add that text shadow? And you said, I thought I did. But IE has this ridiculous rule where you have to have it in its own way. So really, Compass has a lot of great stuff for that. And to tell you the truth, most of the stuff that I've worked with Compass really is border radiuses, shadows for boxes and for text, because people seem to love that, and background gradients, because for some reason some people love background gradients, and things like, let me see if I can show it. Yeah. So the chemistry website, instead of having this be, an image, since I don't know how to use Photoshop to save my life, I would much rather have Compass take care of this, so I don't have to remember what this value is and what this dark value is. What I've done is just said, take this blue value, turn it down here to be 20% darker than the blue value, and make it from top to bottom. And it works on all browsers and does all the correct numbers without me having to do any kind of math or look up anything for the darker value.
Yeah, images and colors don't always line up.
Exactly.
If they're all colors, it's going to line up properly.
Exactly. And it allows you to take a lot of the guesswork out of it, because you can assume if CSS3 is working, if your browser supports CSS3, it's going to have all of that in for each of the each of the different browsers that support it. And so let me see if, I think the example I used was, background linear gradients. So it's a little hectic to look at, simply because it is it's a mixin that takes in one argument, and then it also touches a linear gradient that is something that's handled by Sass to begin with, and then all it does is create that linear gradient there. And then border radius is another great example, which I showed, where you can essentially touch all your different clients without having to worry about anything. Yes?
What if you went in there and did your own linear gradient, mixing in your own pass to Compass include? Is that, which one is priority? The last one is clear?
What I don't know if you would name them both the same thing. My thought process is you might want to name that your own thing.
I understand.
Sure.
I'm saying, what if somebody did that, and you're coming behind somebody and you find something that's
I honestly have never created.
priority?
Let's take a look.
Went out.
Yeah, let's take a look. I'm a little curious. So the question is, what happens if there's... The question is, what happens if there's two mixins that have the same name? How is it being done? Is it done recency first, or the last one that was added there? And the answer is, I've never actually run into it, so I'm going to test it out real quick. So it's going to select the second one, so the one that's defined last. So in this case, instead of doing an all width, instead of touching width at all, I just made the background color orange, because I want to definitely see that it's not working. So yeah, it's the last one that's done. So you could override it easily if you wanted to take the source code for that, for the background gradient, and adjust it to your specific needs if you wanted to add an extra field for maybe something that you're using over and over again. But just in case, if you wanted to, that's all you would need. And so we're done at 8:30, right? Okay, so we probably don't have that much time left. So I just wanted to let you know about Compass. Really, Compass will come in handy once you start working with CSS3 and vendor-specific CSS, and start to make sure that you include it for all the browsers, really. And so with that, that's your 1 hour introduction into Sass. Again, if you have any questions about if you want to look at any particular documentation in a presentation form, if you go to my website, ericsembrat.com, very easy to remember. Under presentations, I've got a couple of presentations that I've given to the Georgia Tech Drupal users group that will go over, for example, how to use media queries in Sass, which might be really helpful to some of you. Or, how to use, this one was a quick presentation that I gave 2 months ago here. And theming with Sass was one I gave last November. It's going to go over a bit more of the basics of Sass in a little bit more detail, and something that's a bit more structured for documentation purposes. So feel free to look at that, and I can post the links to the presentations that I think you guys might find most useful, and provide you links to things like breakpoint and Sass globbing, things that I think are very, very important if you want to work with Sass to make your life a lot easier, so you're not having to start from scratch, basically, on mixins.
And are are you gonna post them to the meetup page?
I'll post them to the meetup and add them to the listserv as well if that works. Yeah, I can do both. Honestly, it's no problem to me. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.